It is 2300 Zulu time, or 7 a.m. in Exmouth, Australia, on this early Wednesday morning, the 9th of January, and interests there are closely monitoring Tropical Cyclone Narelle, located well to the north. The following graphic, updated by the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center as of 2100 Zulu time, shows that the maximum sustained winds based on the 1-minute estimate are up to 55 knots, and much more in the way of strengthening is forecast over the next several days. Their latest track takes the center of the storm just offshore. However, notice that portions of the Western Australian coastline are within the cone of error. Up next is the official update from the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, and based on their cyclone scale, Narelle is now up to Category 2 intensity. The storm is forecast to strengthen into a Category 4 severe cyclone over the next 48 hours, and you can see that they are forecasting more of a gradual bend toward the south, which would still place portions of the Pilbara and Gascoyne region under at least somewhat of a threat of some direct impacts from the storm. The latest microwave satellite pass of Cyclone Narelle continues to show more in the way of organization. You can see that an eye-like feature is starting to develop within this central dense overcast, so within the next 12 to 24 hours, it is very likely that Narelle will become the equivalent of a Category 1 hurricane or typhoon. We are just starting to see daybreak across Western Australia, so we don't have the luxury of using visible satellite imagery at this hour. But even now with the standard infrared, you can see the overall structure of the storm. It is improving. You can see that the outflow is continuing to expand, especially along the northern semicircle and the western semicircle of the storm. If anything, we still see some restriction in the southeast quadrant, but that is likely going to change within the next day or so. And as we turn on the enhanced infrared, this shows us where the strongest convection is occurring with these darker reds and some of these brown colors here, and you can see that the storm is really starting to fire up with that convection developing very close to where the center is estimated to be. And as we turn on the rainbow top color imagery loop, you can make out potentially where the center is, and you can see that it does appear to be located within that central dense overcast, which is also just further confirmation from what we saw with the microwave imagery. Given the latest wind shear analysis, we can still see the reason why the southeast quadrant of the storm is still somewhat restricted. We have the favorable upper level ridge located just to the east of the cyclone, so that is still helping to induce some modest easterly wind shear, so it's ripping apart the eastern side of the storm, thus making it somewhat lopsided with some of the heaviest convection still occurring just to the west of the center. But overall, this environment is still conducive for at least steady intensification, and the wind shear values should steadily decrease across this region over the next 48 hours. As we turn to the regional water vapor imagery, we can see the outflow continuing to expand along the western and northern semicircle of the storm, as we just talked about. But more importantly here, as we look toward interior Australia, you can make out the presence of a very strong mid-level steering ridge. And it's a good thing that this ridge is here, especially for interest along the Kimberley coast and even the Pilbara, because this ridge is going to prevent the cyclone from moving due south. That ridge is going to help to block the storm from moving towards those locations, and it's going to help to move the storm a little bit more toward the west-southwest. Now, it's still going to be rather interesting to see what happens beyond 48 hours, however, because you may notice that we do have some troughing out across the eastern Indian Ocean to the west of Perth, and it's going to be a battle between this trough and the strength of the western periphery of this ridge that really determines how close the center of the storm is going to get to the Gascoyne region. This is another look at the mid-level steering layers, and as we just saw on the water vapor, here's the very strong mid-level steering ridge. But out toward the Indian Ocean, this is where a trough is going to help to eventually erode the western periphery of this ridge. So although the ridge looks rather stout across Perth and the surrounding area, that western extent of the ridge will slowly diminish a little bit over the next 2 to 3 days. Now, will it weaken enough to where Western Australia becomes threatened by a direct landfall of the cyclone? Well, that still remains to be determined, but as of right now, the model consensus is in agreement with the latest forecast from the JTWC and the Bureau of Meteorology, and that is with the storm remaining just offshore. This is a model plot showing several of the model members, and although some of these are not your most accurate models, you can still get the overall idea that there is a fairly strong consensus among the guidance that the storm will remain just offshore. However, as you can imagine, with a 2 to 3 plus day forecast, there is still room for error, and it will not take much for the storm to deviate just a little bit more toward the east for significant impacts to be felt across Exmouth, and that is why all interests there are advised to keep a very close watch on the storm for at least a couple more days. And even if the center of the circulation remains just to your west, depending on how far west, interests along the coast could still be heavily impacted. And also, just to elaborate a little bit more on the overall steering pattern, this is a look at the steering layer at 500 hectopascals from the ECMWF model. You can see currently we have that very strong ridge that we talked about within the last couple of minutes, and as we go into 24 and 48 hours, you can see that the center of the ridge has shifted a little bit toward the east because we have subtle troughing approaching from the eastern Indian Ocean. The cyclone is beginning to feel the effects of that trough coming in, and that is the reason why it will at least temporarily turn more toward the south-southwest. But as we go into day 3 and day 4, you can see that the models are not expecting the trough to be overly strong. So as we go deeper into the forecast period, the ridge begins to build back toward Perth, and that is what keeps the center of the cyclone out to sea. But again, this is still a very extended forecast, and that is why we are still urging all interest there to continue to watch the cyclone and also maybe perhaps begin making some initial preparations. Also, this is a look at the 5-day forecast from the ECMWF ensemble mean, and pretty much what this tells us is that the center of the cyclone could be located almost anywhere within this region. So as you can imagine, if it takes the easternmost track, it could very well be very close to the western Australian coastline. However, by day 6, either way, it looks like the storm will be gradually pushing away as it moves more toward the southwest. Finally, this is just one model solution, but this is the look going into the middle half of the weekend from the GFS, with the cyclone making its closest approach to the coast. And as we've tried to hammer all along throughout this video, even with the center offshore, there are still going to be very strong northerly winds, and I fully expect there to be at the very least some coastal advisories and warnings in effect by this time, with the potential for at least gale force winds right along the coastal areas. And we're also going to have to monitor the amount of water rise around Exmouth Bay. Definitely keep tabs on all of these threats, and if you would like to follow us, you can check out 28storms.com/cyclone. All of our videos and discussions are uploaded within the middle part of the page, and if you're a returning viewer from last season, our left-hand navigation menu has become much better organized. As you scroll through things, all you have to do is open up one of these tabs, and it'll open up with several more links to the information that you're looking for. Also, if you're looking for us on any social networks, we are posting at facebook.com/28storms, and as you can see, we've already made several updates regarding Cyclone Narelle. And we've also shifted all of our Twitter updates from our twitter.com/28cyclones account. We're now posting all of our updates at 28storms, so you can just follow us right here. Again, that's twitter.com/28storms. And do expect to see a lot of United States weather information mixed in here because we are based out of the United States, but we decided to just post everything using one Twitter account now just to avoid confusion with everyone trying to follow multiple accounts, and hopefully that works out for everyone.